Please welcome to the stage Director of Business and Program Development at the Milken Institute, Shikha Jain.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to welcome you to the 6th Annual Milken Institute Middle East and Africa Summit. I was here 2 years ago and was instantly drawn to the warmth of the region and the promise of innovation and business diversification it brings to our growing world. We've already had a rich morning covering complex topics like AI influence in the marketplace, the changing economic landscape, and the intensifying geopolitical conflicts both nearby in the region and globally. Centering on the theme of investing in a shared future and building on the work of our pillars focused on finance, health, international global growth markets, and philanthropy, throughout the summit, we will continue to surface challenges and create strategies and uplift solutions together. During times of upheaval and discord, it is easy to characterize the scenario as us versus them. When focused on a shared outcome, it becomes a we game, working in tandem, investing, and collaborating for a brighter future. Investment can have many faces: education, innovation, currency, technology, access to healthcare. At the Milken Institute, we also zero in on human capital because the common denominator in all this is people and the value we bring to the table. Together, we can truly effectuate change. Today, we have a two-part lunch, starting with Milken Institute's Conrad Kiechel in conversation with Arthur Brooks, a visionary in all things happiness and well-being, and the author of my favorite weekly read, How to Build a Life. That will be followed by a conversation about the art and voices of storytelling through the eyes and voices of icons Edward Norton and Eli Saab Jr., moderated by Milken Institute's MIA resident expert, Louise Taverner. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge those who make the work at the Milken Institute possible, including our MIA underwriter and sponsors and our year-round strategic partners. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
We thank our 2024 Middle East and Africa Summit underwriter for their support of this event. We gratefully acknowledge the participation of the following organizations, whose generous support makes this summit possible. We thank the following media partners for their participation at this event. We thank the Milken Institute's strategic partners for their year-round support of our work around the world. Thank you, and now on to our program. For part one of the lunch program on Wealth to Well-Being, please welcome to the stage author and Harvard Kennedy School professor Arthur Brooks in conversation with Executive Director of Global Programming and Events at the Milken Institute, Conrad Kiechel.
Hello, and thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session. Any session with Arthur Brooks basically doesn't need a moderator because he is one of the most eloquent and incisive people I know. Last time you and I spoke on a stage, it was at our global conference in Los Angeles last year, and I'm still thinking about some of the things you told me then. Arthur, one of the things that we at the Milken Institute are focused on is building meaningful lives.
Right.
And that's a very important part of what we do that animates our mission and our work around the world. Part of that is, thanks to our chairman and founder, Mike Milken, we have a prosperity formula. You have a happiness formula.
Right.
Tell us about that.
So happiness is what I study and teach. I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School, and I teach a class called Leadership and Happiness. It's a science class. It's not a sort of a woo-woo soft class at all. On the contrary, it's about 30% neuroscience and the rest is behavioral science. And one of the things I've been studying over the past few decades of my career and life is what actually makes for a happier life. Now, I put that together I think about this in a way that I try to make it as useful as possible. And I think of happiness as being sort of like a meal with macronutrients. If you want to be the happiest possible person, you need to focus on 3 fundamental macronutrients in your life. They are enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. Those are the 3. And I can diagnose with a series of basic diagnostic tests with the people that I work with and the companies that I'm working with at this point, where there's a deficit in the lives of executives or in the lives of anybody, as a matter of fact, whether or not people are not enjoying their lives sufficiently, and what that is, of course, is a whole scientific literature, whether or not they're getting adequate satisfaction with their accomplishments, and there's a lot that we can talk about with that. That's a deep one as well. And most important is meaning. You can't go 10 minutes without having a concept of the meaning of your life and actually consider yourself to be a happy person. What is that? How do you get that? Well, that's an awful lot about what I do and when I'm talking to people in companies and in academia as well. So enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. Those are the 3 macronutrients of a happiness diet.
Okay, and I didn't hear one of the things we're going to hear to discuss is the role of wealth, personal prosperity and all that. Where does that come in?
So your grandmother taught you that money is not the secret of happiness, and if you're like any of us, you said, well, let me find out myself. And there's a reason for that, because Mother Nature endows us with this sense that if we adequately or more than adequately accumulate the world's rewards, the rewards that actually show us higher in our kin-based groups, our hierarchies, that we have lots and lots of resources, that then automatically we're going to be happy. That's an inborn tendency that we have. But here's the funny thing. Mother Nature really only has 2 goals for any of our lives. One is to survive, and the other is to pass on our genes. The resource accumulation is good for those things. Mother Nature does not care if we're happy. Happiness has a sort of a divinity to it. It makes us capable of doing things above that of any other animals. We have a prefrontal cortex, the big meaty 30% of our brains behind our foreheads that makes us conscious in our decision making, such that we can go against our inborn instincts. And one of the things that people need to learn, that my students need to learn, my MBA students at Harvard, by the way, what do they want to be when they grow up? They want to be you when they grow up. They want to be sitting here because that will be evidence of their worldly success. But they have a sense that there must be something in their goal set that has to go deeper than having the worldly resources. And so what we find is that wealth and power and position and the admiration of the world, these are good things as intermediate goals to achieve other things that we really need. But as end goals, these things actually, as Grandma taught us, don't lead to happiness.
So that begs the question, what are some of the main ways that we can attain or lead to or strive for happiness?
So if the portfolio for greater happiness is not money, power, pleasure, and fame, what is the portfolio? What are the habits of the happiest people? And the answer is there are 4 that we find. We could come up with 10,000 habits that the happiest people have in common, but they're not very interesting mostly. They're trivial. There are 4 things that the happiest people are thinking about on any given day. We can classify them as faith, family, friendship, and work. Those are the big 4. Those are the habits of the happiest people. Now, when I say faith, I don't mean my faith. I'm a Catholic. It's very important. It's the most important part of my life, as a matter of fact. But as a scientist, I can tell you that my path is not the only path to happiness. It's what helps us to transcend our daily lives, that makes the universe large and us small. Left to our devices, we'll be too focused on our daily routines and the psychodrama where we are the star. My job, my breakfast, my money, my friends, my television shows. It's just so boring. You were the star in every one of your dreams last night. It's tedious. You need something that can pull you out of that, whether it's philosophy or an understanding of art and beauty, or whether or not it's walking alone in nature. without your devices, or a Vipassana meditation practice, or perhaps the faith of your youth. Family life is pretty self-explanatory, except that that is greatly attenuated, particularly among people who are especially successful. I talk to executives day after day who have a roommate-like relationship with their spouse and a cordial relationship with their adult children. That's a problem, and especially in a polarized world. 1 in 6 Americans is not speaking to a family member today because of politics. That's insane, and that's avoidable, and that's something we need to attend to. Friendship is an even bigger problem for successful people. You find that I talk to people who run companies all day long. I'm very fortunate to work with some of the most successful executives in the world. And I'll say, do you have friends? And they say, oh, I have a lot of friends. I have a huge amount of friends. And I say, real friends or deal friends? And you know the difference. If you're wondering technically what the difference is between real and deal friends are very useful to you. Real friends are useless. So the real question is, do you have enough useless people in your life? They just love you, whether you're successful or not. And the answer with a lot of successful people is not so much. And then last but not least is work. We love our work. Every single one of us in this room, we over-index on our work because our work is unbelievably satisfying. But I can tell you, based on the data, on the best neuroscientific data, there's only 2 characteristics of a job, of any career, that will bring you unremitting joy. And that doesn't mean joy in every single moment because your work is a headache. That's actually part of the challenge, to be sure, but that will reliably raise your life satisfaction. It has nothing to do with money or position or title or admiration or prestige. No, it has only 2 things in common. Number 1 is that you earn your success. You believe that you're creating value with your life and value in the lives of other people, and you're being rewarded and recognized for that. All of you have that, I'm sure. You wouldn't be here if you weren't, but the real question is, do the people who work for you have that? That's how you keep people forever, is that they're earning their success. This is the reason that merit-based systems are everything, whereas loyalty and tenure-based systems are terrible for morale. Merit is everything. That's why the free enterprise system is the best way to run an economy. That's the reason that merit-based systems inside companies are superior, because they lead to happiness. And the second characteristic of a career and a job that makes sense, that will bring you greater joy, is serving other people. Service to others. Dignity comes from being needed, and the best way that we can be needed, number 1, is having children, and number 2 is having a job where people are relying on us. There are a lot of people in the finance industry here, and I can tell you, people need you. People are going to retire. Ordinary people are going to retire in comfort because of your skills and your dedication to your job. The question is, do the people who work for you see the clients who actually need them? This is what brings higher morale to all kinds of people. But we have to remember this in our own careers as well. Every day, start the day and say, how am I going to earn my success today? How am I going to serve others today? That's how your career will bring you the joy that you seek.
Arthur, that's wonderful. We're in a region, obviously, with a great faith tradition, and part of that faith tradition, as you know, is the importance and the obligation of giving, of generosity. So how does that play into, either scientifically or morally, into happiness?
Yeah, there's a real tradition that asks, is there any way to buy happiness? And actually the answer is yes. Your tendency is to buy stuff, and that's not the way. There's literally nothing in the mall that you could buy today that you care about in a year. But that's our evolutionary tendency, is to accumulate resources beyond what we need. There are 4 ways that you can actually dispose of your income that will reliably bring greater happiness. Number 1 is to buy experiences with people that you love. So when people come to me and say, should I buy a beach house? I say, what are you going to do in the beach house? Are you using it as bait for your adult kids and grandkids? If that's the case, because you want to spend more time with your family, get the beach house, but no other reason. Second is to buy time that you spend with people that you love, or that you spend in prayer or some introspective activity. Don't waste the time that you have bought. So, when you're hiring people to do things for you, make sure that you use the time, you're aware of the time, you use it wisely. That will raise your mood. Number 3 is, especially for young people, is to actually accumulate greater wealth, because saving gives you a sense of progress. Consuming, especially consuming on credit, is the best way to become unhappy. That's why running credit card balances for young people is utterly foolish. And the 4th way is philanthropy. Philanthropy will, if you believe in a cause and it gives you passion, will reliably raise your happiness. Now, I've done all these field studies, and people in my field have done them as well. And what you find is that when you give money away, you reliably get happier, you reliably get healthier, you reliably get richer. We actually have studies that show that causally, when people give money away, they earn more money in the following year. This is one of the best ways that you can stimulate your fortune when you're young. So I tell this to my students. They're 28 years old on average. They're going into jobs that pay an average of $210,000 a year, which is not nothing, but it's not rich. And I say, do you want to supercharge that? Of course they do. Start giving 10% of your money away. And they say, before or after taxes? That was the question. So
student loans.
Student loans, yeah, whatever it happens to be. And that's really important because what it does is it gives you a sense of empowerment. It gives you a sense that you're in control, and that is a huge investment in yourself. Weird data actually show all kinds of other things. That when people are witnessed as givers, they're seen by other people as leaders. The people who are actually the best givers are seen as having the best leadership characteristics. And one of my favorite studies, by the way, was conducted in the UK about 10 years ago, where two psychologists, they got together and they brought men into their lab, men who were mostly married men, but men with girlfriends as well. And they would bring these couples in, and they would, and this is a classic experiment that we would conduct in my field. And they would say, okay, here's the experiment, sir. They're talking to the man. I'm going to give you a bunch of coins, and I want you to walk down this path to this other building. I have a colleague there who's going to interview you when you get there, and then you get to keep the money and go home. Simple experiment. So it turns out it wasn't that simple. They would leave with their wives in a pocket full of coins, and halfway there, a homeless man would come out of a little alley and confront the man and ask him for money in front of his wife. He had to make a decision. Do I give the homeless man money, and how much? Okay, then he makes the decision. He goes to the next building. He's interviewed. Here's the interview. Did you give to the homeless man? And then they interview the wife. How attractive do you find him right now? It turns out the more you give to the homeless man, the more she likes you. News you can use.
That's your better looking. That's better looking through philanthropy.
Philanthropy makes you more handsome, bottom line.
Or beautiful.
Or beautiful.
Yeah.
You choose.
Well, on that vein, one of the things you mentioned to me backstage, which I'm going to follow up very briefly because I know we only have 12 minutes left.
How is this possible?
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
Last time we did this, we had a whole hour. We have to really talk fast. Men and women, husbands, wives, spouses.
Yeah.
You said something to me that I'd never heard before about the difference with what husbands and wives look for in a relationship.
So I'm looking at data all the time, and I'm actually talking to human subjects about the greatest sources of happiness. And one of the greatest sources of happiness, of course, when we're talking about faith, family, friends, and work, the apex of family and friendship is marriage. That's the apex, because that's an adopted kin, the most intense relationship. And that's trouble in your marriage is one of the best ways to become unhappy very, very quickly. But it is also the greatest source of happiness in the average married person's life, is actually having a happy marriage. So one of the things I'm really interested in is what are the basic characteristics of the happiest marriages. And it's not usually convenient or politically correct to say, but men and women want different things in marriages. And it largely has to do with evolutionary psychology. And so what do you find? The happiest marriages have two things in common. He feels admired, and she feels adored, is how it comes about. This has a lot to do with the differences in investment that people actually make in family life. But the bottom line is that we guys, we're very simple creatures. We really want to hear one thing. That is an incredibly big gazelle that you just dragged into our cave. It's going to feed our family for 2 weeks. You're so big and strong. That's all we want to hear, ladies. That's all we want to hear. And so consequently, the whole point, that the advice that I give to men or women, let's take men, you have two jobs. Adore her and be admirable. That's the secret to a happy marriage from the men's side, and the opposite from women's side as well. This is one of the things that I tell my students. It takes a few weeks to get their trust that I have their best interests at heart. And again, there's more to it than that, and your results may differ, and women need to be admired as well, et cetera, all the appropriate caveats. But the bottom line is that we're not that complicated. And we need to love and admire each other, and that's the basis of our happiness, and I think it's a pretty darn good thing too.
That is great. You talked a little bit earlier about young people, and I just want to probe a little bit in terms of how happiness changes over time, but before we get there, I do want to go into social media and the role of social media, because that's obviously been a factor exploding in the last 2 decades. Right. I know you follow the work of John Haidt at NYU in terms of the impact of social media, especially on young women, and that seems to be having now policy impacts around. Australia's now trying to ban social media. How does social media? Can it be a good, or is it, especially for young people? How do we control that monster?
So social media is very clearly correlated with the increase in depression and anxiety, especially for people in their 20s and early 30s. Not so much for people our age, although I'll tell you, I have colleagues at Harvard University who have frittered away their intellectual lives by spending time on social media as opposed to doing things like writing books. It's really incredible how addictive it is, because the algorithms in social media are tapping into primordial tendencies in the human brain. The neuroscience is very clear how this works. Now, the real question then is why is this happening and what are the circumstances? Social media can enhance or detract from your happiness in the following way. Here's the basic formula. If social media is substituting for in-person relationships, you will become lonelier and sadder. If social media is complementing your in-person relationships, it will make you better off. That's why if you're using it to communicate, good. If you're using it to broadcast or consume information from other people you don't know, bad. And so what I see is that the basic rule that I give my students is all of your social media platforms should add up to 30 minutes a day maximum and in one block. If you're doing that, you'll use it to enhance your in-person relationships. Any more than that, and you'll be ignoring people around you, and your life will actually have lower quality. That's the bottom line. Now, there's a really interesting nuance to this. It's not just that social media depresses you somehow mysteriously. We're trying to get to the bottom of that. On the contrary, new neuroscience is revealing the mechanism through which it actually does this. And it has something to do with the brain's capacity to engage something called the default mode network. That's the structures in your brain that are stimulated when you're thinking about nothing and you're bored. The problem with social media is it's an anti-boredom machine. If you're looking at your social media or looking at your screen in general while you're at a stoplight, it's because you have an aversion to boredom. But you need to have your mind wander. If your mind doesn't wander, you don't engage the default mode network in your brain, and you will not engage questions of the meaning of your life. Meaning in life comes from the default mode network, which requires mind wandering and boredom. And if you create ingeniously an anti-boredom machine, what you've created is an anti-life's meaning machine. And that's what's lying behind the mental illness and sadness and anxiety that we actually see with young people today.
So it's one of the least, not answers, but basically one of the ways to cope with that individually for people to spend more time, not on social media, but in an active meditative state.
Yeah.
What kind of tips do you give people?
Well, the thing that I actually recommend is that my students actually go to the gym without earphones, among other things, because that's a great time for mind wandering, to walk actually without any stimulation. That's a great, you need to drive without actually listening to things. And I know it sounds like torture to all of us, and because in modern life we haven't done that in a long time, is the way that works. But I also have a set of protocols or questions that I ask people to ask themselves. The essence of finding meaning requires this mind wandering, but it also requires an understanding of deep questions, not answers to the deep questions. So, for example, I'll ask my students to think about 2 questions. Why are you alive, and for what are you willing to die? Those are heavy questions, and my students often don't have answers. They don't even have understanding of this. By the way, I've asked my own children. My kids are 26, 24, and 21. And when my 24-year-old, my son, Carlos, when he was in high school, he had no answers. I mean, he was, like so many adolescents, he was kind of lost. And so I challenged him to go someplace where he could actually find the answers to these questions. Instead of going to college, he worked on a farm outside by himself for a year. And then he joined the U.S. Marine Corps, which is a hardcore way to find the answers to your why am I alive and for what am I willing to die questions. And he was a scout sniper. He spent some time in El Dafra, right? Not too far from here, as a matter of fact, as a sniper in the U.S. Marine Corps, working with the UAE Special Forces. It was an incredible experience to him. But that boy came out of the U.S. Marine Corps with answers to his questions, at least understanding. I've asked him. I said, well, why are you alive? And he said, because God made me to serve you and everybody. And for what are you willing to die? And he said, for my faith and for my family and for my fellow Marines and for the United States of America and our allies. And I mean, it's solid stuff is the bottom line. It's the solid stuff. But here's the point. He was hanging around Al Dhafra with his fellow snipers and with no earbuds and a lot of time on his hands. And that's where those answers actually occurred to him in his faraway default mode network. And that's what we all need to access.
So Arthur, you give people questionnaires and test them a lot. I'm going to use a little time that we have left to test you with your own Aquinas test.
Okay.
Can you explain to the group what it is?
Yeah, so I mentioned before that there are certain things that we think, because Mother Nature endows us with this tendency to believe that if we get the world's rewards, we'll get happiness for free. In other words, success leads you to happiness. That's wrong. Starting for happiness will give you the success that's adequate for you. But we don't quite believe it. And so what are the marks of success, of worldly success? They come in 4 parts: money, power, pleasure, and honor, which means admiration or prestige or fame or whatever your thing is. Those are the 4. Now that framework was put together by Aristotle. This is not made up by me. And then it was proposed in a more modern sense by 3 great thinkers in the 3 major Abrahamic religions: Maimonides, Averroes, and Thomas Aquinas, more or less in the same 100 years. These were great scientists, by the way. Averroes was an incredible scientist before we had data, unbelievable, in the Islamic tradition of Southern Europe. Money, power, pleasure, and fame. So here's the deal. Those are the things that you're going to tend, these are idols, these are the things that all of us, we tend to pursue. One of them in particular, we all have our mojo in one of these idols, according to modern social science, as a matter of fact. And anytime you make a decision that you later regret around your work, it'll always kind of track back to that idol. So to give you power, you need to know your idol. You're always going to make mistakes. But knowing your idol is knowing you, and therefore you can make better decisions over the long run. So what I do with my students is I say, don't tell me what your idol is. Eliminate the ones that it's not until you're left with the one that you can't live without.
So let's do that.
Okay.
Which is the one that's the least idolic?
For me, of money, power, pleasure, and fame, the one that I could live without the most, and by the way, that doesn't mean you have none of it, it just means you have an average amount, like average humans walking down the street. Power. I don't want power. I don't want power over the people. The reason is because I don't want people to have power over me. That's why I'm a Harvard professor. Nobody's got power over me. I mean, it's like least of all the dean, right? It's he's probably, he's
so
like,
power's off the
if
table.
he's out here right now, it's like
power's off the table.
Power's off the table.
That's the third.
Second,
least.
I've kind of figured out that money doesn't get you that much fun stuff. I mean, money's okay if you use it right, but the bottom line is that being above everybody else in the world is not that important to me. So I'd get rid of that one next.
Okay. So left are pleasure and either fame or honor.
Yeah. I like to feel good, but I'm pretty self-disciplined, and I could trade that one away too. And now we've revealed what my weakness is. My weakness is I want people to like my work. I want people to like me. I'm kind of a pleaser. I'm not proud of that. I'm actually kind of ashamed of that, as a matter of fact. But the bottom line is this. Now I have power because I know this. Now I know that I'm going to fall prey to the lure of applause. I hope you will applaud later. But the point being that this is not yet. Thank you. That's not an applause line.
A couple more minutes left.
This is really important for me because I know I'm going to cut corners for that. If yours is money, you're going to know that that's the kind of thing that will lead you to do something that's not quite in line with your ethical values necessarily, or your priorities or your family life. And that's a really important bit of knowledge for self-management.
So Arthur, we're doing this a little backwards. Instead of introing you, I'm going to outro you with a little bit of your bio. When we first met, you were the head of the American Enterprise Institute, incredibly respected think tank in Washington. Now you're a best-selling author, incredible number of books you sold, 1 million or so, including one that you co-authored with Oprah Winfrey, which is exciting, teaching at Harvard. How do you manage what you do?
Yeah. It's been an exciting time over the past 3.5 years since we started a company that's dedicated to propagating the science of happiness as widely as possible. This is really based on a mission. All of us has a mission. Your company has a mission. Your charity has a mission. You need a mission because the ultimate enterprise that matters for each one of us is you. You're the founder. You're the startup entrepreneur of the enterprise that is your life. You better know your mission statement. You better update it. You better memorize it and actually understand what it is. And I wrote a mission statement for my life. That mission statement was when I left, I was a CEO of a big think tank in Washington, D.C., and when I left to dedicate myself to something else, I wrote the following mission statement. I'm going to spend the rest of my life lifting people up and bringing them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas. That's my personal mission statement. That's why I'm here. I mean, this is awesome to be in Abu Dhabi because it's one of the best places in the world. But fundamentally, I'm here because I want you to join me in the mission, in the movement of creating a better, happier world. That's what I want, and I'm going to go any place that I can where I have the maximum amount of impact and touch leaders. The class that I teach at Harvard Business School is called Leadership and Happiness. I'm teaching them to be happiness teachers in their executive careers. That's what I want. I want all of us to be happiness teachers, to work on these things in our lives and to propagate them and all the people who follow us around that, such that I can live up to my own mission.
Arthur Brooks, it is always a pleasure talking to you. Please join me in thanking and giving a great round of applause.
Thank you.
That was great.
Please remain seated as we set the stage for the next session.